to the Business Blueprint Podcast, where we take you on an exciting adventure through our triumphs and challenges and failures in creating and maintaining a thriving 6, 7, and 8-figure business. Get ready to dive into our strategies, decisions, and yes, even valuable lessons we've learned from our missteps. But that's not all. We'll also bring you industry-leading guests who will provide you with their priceless insights and wisdom. Stay tuned because the captivating journey of the Business Blueprint begins right now. Hi, I'm Charles Hatley with the Business Blueprint, and today I'm joined by Rebecca Melone and Mr. Dan Cuneo. And what we're going to talk about is who we compare ourselves to within our industry. It is a common question of, well, who are your direct competitors? Who do you compare yourself? How do you know whether or not you're doing a good job if you don't have these benchmarks against these competitors? And that really got us thinking about who are our competitors, right? You know, when we started our organization, we wanted to be hyper focused on the employee experience and how that would pour over into the customer experience. And what that caused on us to do was to look outside of our immediate industry and say, where can we really put benchmarks in place so that we know that we're being successful in our pursuit of this EX and CX? Versus what we do as a family law firm, we didn't want to compare ourselves to law firms for especially customer experience. And we didn't want to compare ourselves to other professional organizations as far as employee experience went. So, Dan, I kind of wanted to throw it to you. When you're looking at a good comparison, what do you look at and what kind of factors do you look into?
You know, that's a good question. And a lot of companies and firms, they try to start out comparing to their competitors. And
Mm-hmm.
I always take it from a different approach to where you have to look within first and not compare yourself to other competitors because you could get lost. Because the question is, and you pointed it out earlier, is who is your competitor? Is it the mom and pop shop down the street, or is it a big brick and mortar business? Is it one of the well-known law firms out there? And it's hard because then you're not really truly creating your own identity. You're trying to emulate someone else's, and at the end of the day, you're not really separating yourselves from other companies or law firms that are out there. So I always try to start with what is my mission, what is going to separate me from others, and then comparing to competition as far as what can we do differently or better as far as on the service side. That's where, in my opinion, comparing yourself to someone else or another company or organization comes into play.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Rebecca? I mean, you hear Dan talk about, looking internally first. So when starting the organization, what were your internal goals first?
Right. So I came from a couple of mixed experiences working at other law firms and really came away from the experience feeling like attorneys wanted to sort of pat themselves on the back and really congratulate themselves on a number of things. And clients were just kind of they're around, we don't really need to be super concerned with them. But a lot of what I saw was attorneys doing things out of convenience for their own schedule, for their own, monetary benefit, for their own incentive in whatever way. Sometimes it was to get notoriety with a case, could be any number of reasons, but it was a lot of self-motivation as opposed to being based around the client and their perspective and what they want to see happen. So that was really my initial goal when I was getting started with my practice. Was I didn't feel like attorneys were doing right by their clients. I didn't feel like clients really had a say in their case or what was going to be done or, how they could accomplish their goals. They weren't getting good advice. They weren't getting good direction. So that was really my top motivator when I started out on my own before thinking about branding or building or hiring or anything else. And that is something that has really just stayed with the company throughout. And everybody that we hire has that same approach and has that same mindset of this is the client's case. It's their life, right? They need to be in charge. They need to understand what's going on and they need to be empowered to make the best decisions for their situation, even if I don't agree with it. And then I'm going to do my best to guide them through that process.
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful idea. I know for me personally, it was thinking about where, you never really want to think about the end of your organization, but you want to think, where do I want to be in 10 years? Do I want to look at other people within my close proximity, within my industry, and say, that's where I want to be? Or am I looking at a different approach? You talk about the way that clients are treated. The other day, I was watching a wonderful video about somebody who was lucky enough to go and sit in a fighter airplane with a Blue Angel fighter pilot. And he noticed that this person, this fighter pilot, went through this checklist, and that it was basically an admiral level person going through a checklist with a low level enlisted person. And he asked the pilot, and he said, can you tell me why you go through this checklist? How are you not insulted by that? And the guy goes, and he gave the example. He's like, because I was at a doctor's office and they were completely insulted by a checklist. And the guy said, well, the difference between me as the pilot and the doctor is if there's a mistake, as the pilot, I die. If the doctor makes a mistake, the patient dies. So for me, this truly is my life. And I really likened that back to kind of what you just said, being, client centric, right? Getting away from this idea of, well, if there's a mistake, that's their problem. No, if there's a mistake, that's our problem. We're going to work together to fix that. And that really, called on us to look at different industries, right? Like Southwest Airlines, I think, is a phenomenal industry to look at. How about you, Dan? When you're thinking about this, what do you really go through when you're trying to decide, like, okay, this industry is a little too far removed, or yeah, I think they actually do have a lot to teach us?
That's a great question, because whenever you think of lawyers, most individuals would think that the legal field is so far behind, but
Mm-hmm.
the legal field is so far behind. Whether you're talking about business or even representation, right? I can tell you that a firm that I was with prior, it it didn't the firm didn't really take the client's true goals into consideration, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that, and a lot of law firms will fall into this too, but it's more cookie cutter, and it
Mm-hmm.
becomes frustrating. And it's more of, you have to follow process and procedures of the company or the firm, and ignoring what the true goal or intentions of a client is. It's not a one size fits all. And
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca said it earlier, to where you really need to look at what are the client's goals, so you can basically zealously advocate for them. That's why we went to law school, is to become lawyers to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to, the reward, as Rebecca was saying, that attorneys want just to be recognized. I've just finished this book called The Motive by Patrick Lencioni, and
Mm-hmm.
it's about leadership, and it's either reward leadership or servant leadership. And I've always believed in leaders, a true leader is someone who wants to serve, not
Mm-hmm.
someone who wants that fancy title or the money or the accolades or whatever else that comes with it. Is truly leading and guiding. And that's what lawyers are, is they're leading and guiding their client down the best path to try to achieve their goals. And it really depends on what those goals are, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you want to be able to flesh those out in your meetings. And sometimes clients just don't understand the law or understand the entirety of the situation. So we have to manage those expectations. But it doesn't mean we ignore their goals or what they're saying. If we can't fit it into a certain way that we practice, then
Mm-hmm.
we just can't help them out. Because to your point, and I love that analogy on the checklist, it's so true. Whether you're a pilot or a doctor, in our field, we want to have the checklist. And the checklist
Mm-hmm.
is going to be those practice guidelines, but it's a guideline. And that's all it is. And a true a firm that has the true best interest of the client is going to have their attorneys and their paralegals and their staff follow the guidelines, but not be so cookie cutter, because those are just able to help us and move us forward or move the case forward. But it's really boils down to listening and making sure that we can represent the client the best way. Because if we have that checklist of guidelines, that's great. But if we don't make sure that we're following the guidelines and what the client wants, the death is going to be in a family law situation, the client not seeing their children, or the client losing a lot of their property that they've worked hard for, or in criminal, losing your freedom. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's death right there, regardless of what the situation is. So
Mm-hmm.
there's just so many important implications that could arise from this, to where we want to make sure that we're doing our best. And it really just boils down, in my opinion, just listening to the client first.
And I love what you say about Lencioni's book, The Motive. Being a servant leader. I know that it's hard to think about, but I would love to come to a point within industry in general where we didn't have titles, right? Where we got rid of titles because we really want to identify people that are trying to step up and do something for a reason versus I'm trying to step up and do something so I get a cool 3-letter title after my name, like CFO or whatever. You're just there, but of course that would cause wreak havoc on all sorts of other issues that may not be easily solved. Rebecca, what's your stance on you know not getting rid of titles, but not focusing on titles as much?
Mm-hmm. So one thing we say a lot in our company is that it's all a circle.
Mm-hmm.
We all rely on each other. Without someone to bring in new clients, there's no work to do. Without somebody to do the work, there's no bills to send. Without collecting the bills, there's no money in the bank to advertise. And it just goes around and around, right? You have to have every single piece of that circle in operation. And each team needs to be able to communicate effectively with the other team. And there can't be a, well, sales is more important than billing is more important than, you know what I mean? We can't
Mm-hmm.
have that hierarchy because they all rely on one another. And it has to go in a circle. And we have to be able to send things back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing that we've really strived for in our company. And I think it speaks to any sort of industry. It's
Mm-hmm.
the same type of thing. You have to have effective marketing to bring in the clients, and you have to have people pay, and they have to get the good service or they're not going to come back or refer. And so it all relies on each other
Mm-hmm.
in order to be effective.
And getting that it's a separation from your ego, right? You can't have an ego and say, well, because what I do is I actually produce the product, I may be more important than the person that collects the money for the product, or hey, I'm the person that goes out and sells the product, so I have to be more important than you. It's getting rid of that ego. And I think this really speaks to that servant leadership. And Dan, I'm going to ask you probably what a very tough question is. How do you not talk about getting rid of the ego, but show and live divorcing yourself from the ego when you're working with people within your organization?
Sure. In the beginning, it's hard, right? Because we all work hard, and when you get that promotion, that title, you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, it's just a title. It could be 3 letters, it could be infinite amount of letters, right? It doesn't really matter. It's just a title. We're all human. One of the things that I did at a prior company that I worked for, because it the way that the service was provided to a client was less than subpar. Subpar would be
Mm-hmm.
probably a complimentary term. And I wanted to do a retreat, and I called it a Rocks and Boulders retreat. And
Mm-hmm.
we had everyone from the company that could attend. And we had maybe 100 people, 80 to 100 people, but it was a good showing. And I didn't have many rules of engagement, is what I called them. But the number one rule was you check your ego and your title at the door. And
Mm-hmm.
it ties in perfectly what you're saying about the circular leadership and the circular being able to know that we're all part of the same goal, right? We all have the same interest in mind. When the company does well, then we all will benefit from it, and the clients will benefit from it. And so I thought it was very successful. It was 2 days long. That was intense. And the other rule was, so we have 1, check your ego at the door. 2, check your title at the door. And 3, participate. If you're not going to participate, we don't need someone there just sitting and taking notes and being scriveners. We all know how to take notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to encourage that active participation. That's why number 1 and number 2 were so important, because once those are followed, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO there, the owner of the company there, the COO, whatever. We're all there for one reason, that is to make the company better, to provide better service, to have that gold standard, but then to also learn from one another. And it was tough in the beginning because everyone's a little bit gun shy to speak up. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I also brought in a motivational speaker that talked about what my goal was. So it helped having someone break that ice and be able to kind of encourage others to open up. But that from my experience, after we had that first awkward 15-20 minutes, it was a beautiful event. Everyone contributed. And there are a little bit more rocks and boulders than I thought, but that's okay because we're able to work through those. And then it's right. The next step is, once we've identified those, what can we do to make things more efficient and make things better, right? Because the whole motto of the event was do better. And that was, no matter how well you think something is going or how good you think you are, we all can do better. And so with that in mind, as a theme, we were able to work through a lot of tough issues. But at the end of the day, we were stronger and we were better. And then we put it into writing. So once it's memorialized and we saw it, we started putting up what the rocks and the boulders were and identified deadlines and timelines for when we're going to achieve those and how we're going to achieve those. And we just did it a little bit at a time, and we celebrated the small wins. And after you got a couple wins under your belt, you felt that momentum, you saw the excitement, and it was wonderful. And then we started to be able to provide that better service because everyone got it right. They knew, okay, I don't care if you're the CEO, if you're the receptionist, we're all in this together, and we all have that one common goal. And if one of the links in the chain is weak or breaks, it
Mhm.
messes everything up, right? So then your circle isn't really a circle anymore, and then it just creates a lot of frustrations and anxiety and pain points for everyone else. And that's how I kind of tied in that whole circular leadership is, if we have a weak link or we have someone who's not really actively engaged or believes in the process or the product that we're selling or providing, then it's going to create that clog in the wheel, which at the end of the day, even though it's frustrating for the company, it's even more frustrating for the client. And that's what we want to make sure that we provide, that gold standard, that great service to the client. And if you have that, then you have the employee experience, and they truly go hand in hand.
Yeah, I like the idea. I love the idea of removing titles as you walk into something like that. I was reminded by one of David Goggins' books. He talks about going into the Army Rangers, and when you go into the Army Rangers, they remove everybody's rank. So everybody walks in, no matter how high you are or how low you're ranked. Everybody walks in. You're now an Army Ranger, and that's it. And that helps solidify the teamwork. And there's a lot of books, David Goggins, Jocko Willink, Leif Babin, that really talk about leadership from a military point of view. Leading without titles, leading from the middle, right? Not from the back, not from the front, but leading from the middle. And it really gets to how much we can look to other industries and find lessons, right? You would think like in corporate world, what is this similar in corporate world as being a Navy SEAL in an active war zone? Well, not much, right? I would never compare sitting in a meeting to being in an active war zone, but there are lessons of leadership that can be learned about how to lead people through what is a very stressful time. And we can also look to other industries. We've talked about the gold standard, and one of my favorite books is the New Gold Standard by Michelli, and it talks about the Ritz Carlton. And Rebecca, I believe that you've read that book a little bit. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. And one thing that I love is that you can take feedback from anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can have a phenomenal experience at a hotel, at a doctor's office, at a retail store, wherever, and you can still take those lessons back and figure out, how can I do this in my company? How can I execute or make the experience better for my clients, based on whatever this is. And so the gold standard, one of the things I really like in that book is empowering the employee to make the client happy. And so every employee at the Ritz-Carlton, if there's a problem with the room or the service or whatever, the employee has like $2,000 that they can spend to make that customer happy and to fix whatever the problem is. And they don't have to call a manager, and they don't have to get approval, and they don't have to do this, and they don't have to do that. So there's no delay, and they can fix the problem. They can, move things along, and it makes an all around better experience. And so there's an acknowledgement that problems are going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're still going to have some sort of issue, even when you're the Ritz-Carlton and you're doing everything phenomenally well. But getting rid of that kind of red tape, when you're dealing with an issue, and just being able to I can take care of this for you right now. No waiting, no nothing. And it's not going to be more of a headache for the client. I think that's one of the biggest lessons. And I think that's one thing that every industry can really execute. If you give your employees the autonomy and the ability, let them fix the problem. Don't let it spiral and snowball and turn into something worse.
Hi, this is Dan Cuneo with the Business Blueprint. Thank you for taking time to listen to this week's podcast. Please join us next week for part 2.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this insightful and entertaining, be sure to hit subscribe below and join us on social media to get more insight into what we are going through each and every day.